Welcome to Mineral Talks Live, the monthly live mineral webinar that brings you in-depth and in-person interviews with mineral people from around the world. Mineral Talks Live is brought to you by a joint effort among the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, the SMMP, and Blue Cap Productions. Tune in on the first Wednesday of every month and stay connected to your mineral world. Now, broadcasting live from beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii, the land of aloha, ukuleles, and shakas, this is Mineral Talks Live. Aloha to all our friends around the world, and a big mahalo for tuning in to our show today. Today is Wednesday, August 3rd, and this is the final Mineral Talks Live episode for the summer of 2022. It's now been over 2 years and 64 episodes since we started Mineral Talks Live, and we've still got a lot to do. I'm Brian Swoboda, the president of Blue Cap Productions, and together with the two best partners a person can ask for, Dr. Raquel Alonso Perez from the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, and Dr. Eloise Gaillou from the Society of Mineral Museum Professionals, also known as the SMMP, we want to welcome you to our program. For those of you joining us for the first time, Mineral Talks Live is the monthly mineral talk show where we sit down with people from all facets of the mineral world to learn more about what they do and who they are. Our guests include some of the best curatrix, curators, collectors, dealers, miners, researchers, artists, and media people in the mineral world. For a complete list of all our past guests and links to those interviews, please visit the URL at the bottom of the screen. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. And if you also click the bell icon, you'll be the first to know when we've posted a new show on Blue Cap Productions' YouTube channel. Now, a lot of people have come up to me and said, Brian, how is it that Mineral Talks Live keeps on going and is so much fun? Well, one of the ways that happens is that this program isn't just a conversation between me and our guests. All of you are part of the show when you participate through the chat or the Q&A feature, both of which are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat feature allows you to type messages to everyone watching the live show. Want to try it out? Go ahead and type a message to everyone telling us where you are in the world. Do it now. All right. See? Nice job. That's all it takes. So throughout the show, if you have thoughts, comments, or questions about what we're discussing, this chat area is where you can post them and interact with each other while we're talking. Usually our guests and I aren't able to read those comments, generally because we're gazing deeply into each other's eyes. But Raquel and Eloise will be very active in the chat area, may even interject a question or two to us during the interview. Today, Eloise is not able to join us. She was here a little bit earlier, but she had a dinner engagement she had to go to. So it's going to be Raquel who's going to be interacting on that chat window. But what if you have a general question you're dying to ask, but it's a bit off the topic of what we're discussing at the moment? In that case, feel free to type your question into the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to get to that at the end of the show. Finally, towards the end of the program, you'll see a window pop up on your screen. This is our quick fire 5 questions. Yes, we brought that back, and I can hear all the people rejoicing. And this is where we see how well you know our guests. If you get none of the questions correct, you have to buy our guest a drink the next time you see him at the mineral shows. So today we're going to talk about mineral books. One of the first pieces of advice we give any new collector coming into the field is to read. Get your hands on as many mineral books as you can and absorb all that great information. The knowledge contained in some of the classic mineral books is exactly what's needed to fuel the passion in the new collector's hearts. Now, every once in a while, if we're lucky, we get to meet an author who has just created the next classic mineral book. Today's guest is one of those people. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to our show a man who is both prolific and passionate, Mr. Roy Starkey. Roy, how are you today?
Hi, Brian. It's great to be here. Thank you very much indeed.
Terrific. How's the weather back there?
24 degrees and sunny. Really, really pleasant.
Terrific. Now, Roy, you know that in this program, I always like to start this by asking people a little bit of their background. Tell us about you and how you first started getting interested in minerals.
Yeah, well, I can actually remember that. And I'm going to hold up a little specimen here, and you've got a slide of this. And it's a piece of mica schist from Austria that my mother collected when she was there on a holiday shortly after the Second World War. And if you pop up the first slide, you can see it's not a very large or exciting piece of rock, but it caught my eye, and it used to live in a jar on her dressing table. And that really always fascinated me. And if you pop the next slide up, this will show you when I had hair in the bottom right-hand corner. That's me with the red hair. And some of my school chums, all with pretty smart haircuts. And I attended this school in Horsham in Sussex. And I was very interested in science, so biology, chemistry, physics, maths. And at that time, of course, we had the Apollo space program running from 1968 through to about 72. And I was absolutely glued to this. And some of the British viewers will remember people like James Burke and Patrick Moore. And the really hairy job. You think Mineral Talks Live is difficult to do live, trying to cover space with radio blackouts and satellite links and time lapse was very, very nerve-wracking, I think, for the presenters. But
I know the whole Apollo program was a huge thing for us in America. I am glad to see that it was just as big for you over there in the UK.
Yeah, it really was. So all my school friends were sort of similar-minded, sort of a bit boffin-like. We were all interested in chemistry and experiments and so on. And the blue thing at the bottom left-hand side there is the price list of one of the chemical suppliers. And believe it or not, back in the 1960s, 70s, you could actually order chemicals through the post. Nowadays, you'd probably get the FBI coming to see why you were doing that. But so if you skip on to the next one, I'll show you a couple of the places that I used to go. So at the top right here, we have the garage doors of a mineral dealership called Gregory Botley. They were one of the most famous and longest established geological suppliers in London, and subsequently taken over by Brian Lloyd, who I'm sure some of you will know. And you would go to this door, knock on it, and after what seemed like an age, a guy called Peter Hurrell would normally come down and open it and say, "What do you want?" And you say, "I'd like to come and look at the minerals, please." And you'd walk through what looked like an explosion in a mine dump, and then upstairs into the showroom, which is the black and white photo. And it was just incredible. The drawers were full of all sorts of interesting things, many without labels. But it has
a Harry Potter-esque feel to it, that black and white photo.
It really does. It was a great place to go. And the other place I frequented was the Geological Museum. And the lower left picture shows what that used to look like. This is now a big atrium in darkness lined with black slate with an escalator going upstairs. It's changed dramatically. Mm-hmm. But I really used to enjoy going there. There's a query in the chat about, can we make the slides bigger? I don't know. I don't have control over that.
Yeah, that would be a individual thing on the viewer's side where you change your view from probably gallery to speaker.
Okay. So the Geological Museum is right next door to what everyone knows as the British Museum or the NHM. And they merged some years ago so that the collections are now part of the NHM collections. Mm-hmm. If we go to the next slide, this was where I used to head almost every time. This was above the front door on the third floor. And this was a wonderful collection of all British minerals known as the Ludlam Collection. So this book on the right-hand side, you can track this down on the internet as a PDF file. And I think it's probably one of the best books ever written about British mineralogy. And it has a tremendous number of references and footnotes. But the specimens were all nice, hand-sized sort of cabinet specimens, and I just used to go and drool over these. Now, at this time, of course, I was trying to get into minerals, and I started my own collection. And the next slide shows some of these specimens in their original matchboxes. Ryan, can you change that one?
I'm sorry. There we go.
Yep, that's it. And I pulled one out at the bottom right. It might amuse you. It's labeled "Warning: Toxic Material." Of course, poisonous things or things that go bang are much desired by schoolboys. And I was given this by one of my friends at school as a specimen of realgar and orpiment from the States. But I still have these little boxes. They're not really formally part of my collection anymore, but it's a nice reminder of how you can get into the subject for a relatively small budget. But probably my first big break was a trip to Cornwall in April 1973. And if we flap the next slide up, this was a journey that I made by public transport with several changes of bus, starting from Littlehampton in Sussex all the way to Newquay, where I met a guy called Sam Weller. And he ran a field centre, and I was able to join a school party there. So I was aged only 17 at the time, and I was helping to look after this bunch of 10-year-olds. And I had a brilliant week. We visited working mines, clay pits, coastal localities, museums. And towards the end of the week, Sam's son, John Weller, had just returned from a trip to Morocco, which was quite a big adventure in those days. And Sam said to me, "You might like to come and see what John's been collecting." And I was led into the kitchen, and John had laid out possibly some dozens of specimens of this stuff, which is vanadinite on barite. And many people will be familiar with this, but it was very new at the time. And my parents had given me...
Roy, I'm going to ask you to hold that up again and have Raquel spotlight your camera there.
Okay.
There we go.
So a nice sparkly little specimen of vanadinite on barite. And if we flip to the next slide, you'll see a photo of it, I think. That's it. So I had been given a £5 note for emergencies. Now, £5 was a lot of money, especially to me. So in today's currency, it's about $74. And so I asked John, I would love one of these specimens. How much would it be? And he said to me, "How much have you got?" So I said, "Well, I've got £5. So he said, "That'll do." So I spent my emergency money on that piece of rock. And you can imagine what my parents said when I got home.
You did what?
I still have it, and I guess if you track the price, you probably would pay perhaps $30 or $40 for that now, but I think I probably paid over the odds at the time. Anyway, that was my introduction. So from then, I was then given the opportunity to join a mineral club in Wolverhampton. When I left university, I got married, moved to the Midlands in the centre of England, and I joined a club in Wolverhampton called the West Midlands Mineral and Mining Society. And through them, I was able to meet other collectors. And the guy who I remember most from that time was a chap called David Middleton, who was a technician in the steelworks. And he really was my mentor and taught me how to go about collecting underground, how to look at things through microscopes, and really was my general field collecting companion for many years. And we got interested in micromounts. And this was because of a guy called Roger Harker, who was a mineral dealer. And as a result of that, I got a copy of the International Directory of Micromounters, which was published by a chap called Randolph Rothschild. And there were very few British collectors. So I thought, well, maybe we could find some more. So I set about advertising and trying to get some people to register. And that grew into an organisation called the British Micromount Society. And we are celebrating 40 years in the business. And it's a really major force in British mineral collecting. And if you flip to the next slide, you'll see the very crude marketing effort that resulted in the launch of the British Micromount Society. This was a mineral show organised at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Leicester. And you can see all the black and white photos. I'm sure there'll be many viewers who did their own developing and printing. I did all these. I printed these black and white photos on the right-hand side. And anyway, we signed up about 30 people, and it went from strength to strength.
Roy, when you started, you said you signed up 30 people, but when you started it, how many members did you have?
Well, that was it. At the end of the show, we had about 30 people.
Okay, so when you started it, there was basically you and a couple friends.
That's right.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. And one of the people I met through that was a guy called Trevor Bridges. And Trevor, sadly, no longer with us, but a mineral was named after Trevor a few years ago, Bridgesite CE. And Trevor was really a major figure in my life and in the mineral world in the UK. He was a chemist, a chemical engineer, and he delighted in trying to make complicated chemistry simple for people that were interested to learn. At the same time, I joined the Russell Society, and the Russell Society is an organisation which celebrates 50 years this autumn, and that is probably the major force for mineral collectors who want to belong to an organisation in the UK. Of course, many collectors may be solo operators as well, but at its peak, we've had about 500 or 600 members. We still have around 400 now, although, like many organisations, it's an ageing population. So at that time, we moved to a larger house, and I was able to have a mineral room. And if you pop the next slide up, I really felt I'd arrived. This was the mineral room. Me looking a little more youthful today. It's one of those slightly posed shots, isn't it? You can tell I put it on a tripod on a self-timer. But anyway, yes. So I had.
Yes, but look how proud and serious you are in this photograph. It's absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. So made my own.
One drawer open in the background. Very, very. It's almost like the studios I create here.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So the next shot shows a big change in direction for my life, and that was children. They do change your life a little bit. And this is my daughter Carol, and I just returned from a week's trip up to Scotland, and she's helping me unwrap them. And the care that she lavished on these and placed them into these tomato trays was just gratifying to me. Really, a really nice shot.
Terrific.
So I guess the next thing probably is how did I get interested in Scotland? Scotland's a long way from my home. And if we go to the next slide, there was a magazine. It wasn't very technical. It's called Gems Magazine. And this was published, and it came out 6 times a year. And one of the columnists was a guy called Peter Rogers. And some people may be familiar with Peter as a great agate enthusiast. And he serialized a number of articles on a guy called Matthew Forster Heddle. And he was really the doyen of Scottish mineralogy. He published posthumously a book called The Mineralogy of Scotland. It's a big 2-volume tome. And I got fascinated in these articles, and I went into the reference library and looked at the original book and made numerous trips over the following, 20, 30 years in Heddle's footsteps. And as a result of that, I became very interested in the Cairngorms. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see what the countryside looks like. So the mountains here are up to around 4,000 feet. It's a long way from the nearest road, not in terms of the US, obviously, but in the UK, it's quite hard to be 10 miles from the nearest road. And you are about 10 miles from the nearest road in the centre of the Cairngorms. And the young man here is John Faithful. He's currently the curator, or just retired curator, at the Hunterian Museum at the University of Glasgow. And we had not been here before. We didn't know anyone that had. We weren't sure what to expect. And of course, back in 1986, there was no Google Maps, no GPS, no internet. We thought a sledgehammer might be useful. You would see the sledgehammer lying on the ground. It wasn't. We carried it 10 miles in and 10 miles out. But anyway, that trip resulted in me finding a specimen. And if we go to the next picture, you'll see.
Now, Roy, before we go to the next picture, I have to say that any adventure with a travel companion by the name of John Faithful, you just can't get anything better than that. That's got to be the best companion name in the world. This is like the start of epic stories here. He is absolutely the best companion in the world, and he's an extremely good field mineralogist and geologist as well. I love it.
So when we got into the quarry, the weather wasn't quite what we expected. There was still snow on the ground. It was thick fog, low cloud, and collecting conditions were non-ideal. But if we can get Raquel to focus on the camera again, this little specimen here was probably what changed my life. And there was a little beryl crystal you can perhaps just see, but we've got a photo on the next slide. And I was absolutely hooked. There it is. it's not the world's best beryl specimen by any means, but it's about 1 centimetre long. And it demonstrated to me that there ought to be things to find in the Cairngorms. And that was really the beginning of my love affair with that area.
That's fantastic. Wow, what a find. And you still have that in your collection, obviously.
I do. It's
showed it to us.
yeah.
Can you, Raquel, can we cut back to Roy's camera so we can see it live again, just to give us a sense of scale?
Yeah, I'll put my finger next to the beryl crystal.
Look at that.
So yeah, a lot of effort to retrieve that specimen. So if we change direction now slightly, at around, what am I thinking about, 2008, I got interested in picking up a project that a friend of mine, the late Mick Cooper, had been working on, and that was a biography of a mineral dealer in the UK called Dick Barstow. And if we flip to the next slide, we've got a photo of Dick. So Dick on the right-hand side, he was the most energetic and diligent mineral dealer that we had seen in the sort of the 1970s period. He was extremely active and very professional in how he went about doing things. And Mick had started work on writing his sort of life story and sadly died quite unexpectedly. And I'd been feeding him some information and some photos, and a friend of mine, Ivor Thurgood, said to me, "What's going to happen about Dick's biography?" And I said, "Well, I really don't know, but I'll talk to Mick's widow, Catherine, and ask her." Anyway, long story short, I decided that I would pick it up and see if I could finish it off. And with the help of many people, it was actually published in the UK Journal of Mines and Minerals back in 2010. And the lower picture is me. I'd actually travelled to France to interview Dick's widow. This is Yvonne Barstow sitting under the tree. And it was a real fantastic project to get involved in. And I suppose that's really where I got my taste for historical research and writing.
Now, Roy, this is like, at this point, your life is shifting from a love of geology and some field adventures like you had just shown up in Scotland. And now we're going to go into the whole book side of the story. But I want to kind of understand your mind frame a little bit when you decided to take on this book project. Did you know it was going to be a book? Did you have a vision of what would happen in the future, that your life was about to change? How did you feel qualified to do this? Unwrap that a little bit, because I think that it has turned out in retrospect, it's turned out to be a major life shift for you. But I'm trying to understand where your mind was at that time when you made that course change.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing was, no, I didn't set out to write a book. If we flip to the next slide, there's a couple of MinRec articles. The first one was a joint project with Tom Cottrell and Steve Plant. And we had been interested in Angleside, type locality, something Malcolm Southwood spoke about a few episodes ago.
Right.
And we had managed to find some really interesting contemporary specimens, and we got deeply involved in the history and decided that writing it up for the MinRec would be a good thing to do. And so we did that as a 3-man team. And it went down very well, and Wendell was very pleased with it. And I make the point now that people complain sometimes, why isn't there more stuff about whatever subject you're interested in? And the answer is you have to write it. So the next slide, Wendell came back very promptly and said he wanted someone to write an article on Herodsfoot, and would I do that? And I was a little hesitant because I didn't know a fat lot about Herodsfoot mine. Obviously, I'm familiar with the specimens. And I thought, well, yeah, I really enjoyed digging into the literature, so why not? So I set about doing that in the autumn of 2010, finally sent it in just to Tucson Show Week in February 2012, and it came out in the middle of that year. And to my surprise, it really went down a storm with Wendell. He was very complimentary about it, and he gave it almost the whole of the issue. So I thought that was very good.
Yeah, I mean, that's superb for a publication like the Mineralogical Record. And this was 2012, so it wasn't that long ago. Mm-hmm. So people were liking what you were doing when it came to writing.
Yeah, so it seemed. So
Yeah.
I thought perhaps I could do something about the Cairngorms as an article for the MinReg. I'd been going there for 20 odd years. I had a lot of photos. I knew quite a bit about the subject from historical research and localities. And so the next slide really was a bit of a mock-up of maybe there could be an article on the Cairngorms. And so in March 2012, I started just compiling jottings in the lunch hour at work, picking up hyperlinks, getting photos, finding references. And I very quickly realized there was probably more than enough material, far too much, in fact, for an article for the MinReg. And I wondered perhaps whether it could be a book. At that time, two friends of mine, Nick Crawford and David Anderson, had just self-published a book on Scottish agates. And I had got a copy of this. I was really impressed with it. And I talked to them about how had they gone about it, because neither of them had ever published anything either. And it turned out that Nick had a cousin who was a typesetter. And even more bizarrely, he lived about half an hour's drive from me. So I thought, okay, I'll go and see this guy, David Kelsey, and have a chat to him and see whether he might be prepared to work on a book with me. So again, long story short, he said yes, he would be interested in doing that. And so I then went away and got on with pulling the manuscript together. Now, in terms of what was it going to look like, if we go to the next slide, slightly putting the cart before the horse, but this is the cover of the book. And it's the shape and size that it is because it followed the style of a book that was published by Bob Symes and Peter Embry, Minerals of Cornwall and Devon, which appears in the next slide.
Roy, could you hold that book up again?
Sure. Yeah.
Pull it back a little bit.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So you had seen that book, you respected that book and decided to make your Crystal Mountains book based on that.
Yeah, same sort of style and the same format. And the reason that the size is as it is it was jointly published with the Mineralogical Record, so it was a US paper size. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we have in the UK an occasional series. So all of these books have come from different stables with different authors and different organizations. They're not all quite the same size and shape. But gradually, at something like a 5 to 10 year interval, we were seeing another book come out. And so in 2014, I managed to bring Crystal Mountains through to publication and did the whole thing as the Agates guys had done theirs, self-published it, set up a website and started to try and distribute it. And so that was really, that was how it came about.
Quite a feather in your cap. That's good company to keep based on what I'm seeing here.
So, yeah. So I started very quickly after that to think, well, what's the next project? Because I'd really enjoyed the detective work and writing the story, meeting all the interesting people along the way. And I thought, well, probably the logical thing to do would be, rather than have a field area 500 miles away, maybe do one that's a bit more local to home. And if you look at those titles, there's a big hole in the middle of the UK, what we call the English Midlands. And that happens to be where I live. So I thought, well, I've got a lot of the stuff banked in my head, obviously familiar with the sort of the collecting localities, some of the history. And so I set about almost immediately the research for Minerals of the English Midlands. And the next slide is the cover of that one.
So then this is 4 years after your previous publication.
Yeah, and it's a very much larger job. You can see it's 426 pages. It's the same format, but more than twice the thickness. And therefore, there was a huge amount of original research, a lot of travel, time and cost, and a lot of images. There's nearly 1,000 photos in this book. And
wow.
any of the audience who've done mineral photography will have some feel for the amount of work that 1,000 images, mostly shot on location, in universities or museum stores represents. It's quite an undertaking. Okay.
And how was this book received?
Yeah, this has gone well. got rid of about 800 over the period since 2018. Still some left, but obviously getting rid of books is the harder bit. Writing them is fairly straightforward. Yeah. And then, having got that one laid to rest, I thought, well, there is a slightly funny backstory to this. When you take out ISBN numbers, I guess you have the same system in the US. But basically, if you want a proper publication to be findable, it has a number, international system of book numbers. And when I bought the first ones for the Cairngorm project, you had to buy 10. And my wife said to me, oh, what are you going to do with the others? And I said, well, yeah, we'll maybe use them up over time. And she, has to be said, wasn't wildly enthusiastic about that prospect. Anyway, we'd used up 4 because you have one for hardback and one for softback. So there were still 6 left. So have a go at another one.
Why not?
Why not? So the next thing that I really wanted to tackle was the story of Sir Arthur Russell. And I think many people will be familiar with Sir Arthur Russell's collection. There'll be quite a number of people who even have specimens with labels with his handwriting. And this collection was bequeathed to the Natural History Museum in 1964 and is widely regarded as the finest British topographical collection ever assembled. So we can flip on to the next one. We'll see a picture of the...
Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold up my copy of the book so that people can see it. This is the book right here, and you can see it's quite a healthy sized book. And I mean, I've spent some time flipping through this, and it's absolutely just wonderful book. Beautiful plates, a lot of great historical information here. Photographs inside the museum. I think there's Arthur Russell right up on the opposite side of the page. Really fantastic book. And I'm going to do a little plug for you. For those of you who are interested in taking a look at this, if you come to the Tucson show, the 2023 Tucson show, it's February 3rd at the Tucson Fine Mineral Gallery. There's going to be a special book day with people giving presentations, and Roy's going to be there giving a presentation and having copies of this book. So come on down, take a look at it. But then I'm going to let you go on with your story, Roy.
Okay. Thanks very much, Brian. So yeah, let's go to the next one, and we'll just say a little bit about who the man was. So Arthur Russell, I think a lot of people, because he has a knighthood, it was actually a baronetcy rather than a formal knighthood. Sir Arthur Russell sounds quite posh. You think big house, lots of money. That wasn't really the whole story. And he was really a man who managed rather than was wealthy. He was property rich and cash poor. And he was very committed to building a very good British mineral collection. Single-minded, I would liken him to the Mounties, always getting their man. And he was not only a very effective field collector, but he also spent a lot of time tracking down old collections. And at the bottom of the slide there, you can see names like Philip Rashley, Robert Ware Fox, John Ruskin. I'm sure many people will be familiar with some of these. And across the bottom, just some of the wonderful specimens. And he has lots and lots of wonderful specimens. So Russell is inherently a really interesting guy. And if we go to the next slide, we can see what Swallowfield Park looked like. This was the family home. It had been in the hands of the Russells for several generations. And the upper pictures are the exterior in around about 1964, when the property was finally sold upon Arthur's death. And the lower pictures are dated probably early 1900s of the interior. So you can see that it was a bit of a time warp. Lots of antique furniture, interesting paintings, works of art, and so on. And so this was the surroundings in which the young Arthur sort of became an adult and subsequently made his home. Well, if we skip forward to the next one, we can see what the place looks like today. It's what we call a Grade 2 listed building, which means it's of architectural merit, something of historical significance. And the brochure here is of the current estate management company, Sunley Heritage, who actually manage the property. And it's now been divided up into 29 apartments. And if anyone's interested in having a look at these, if you go onto one of the estate agent type websites, it's not hard to find apartments for sale. There's one or two come up every year. And I've been very fortunate to be allowed to go inside the house and to see some of the public areas and to get some sense of the environment. And that's been a great privilege. So the next one, Brian, if we can just go to that, is the Russell Room. And obviously we don't have time this evening to go into all the detail, but this is where Sir Arthur's collection finally finished up. It's in a special area in the Natural History Museum. These cabinets are predominantly Sir Arthur's own cabinets. He bought these one at a time at considerable expense when he could afford to. And the museum subsequently had 3 copies made because some of the others were not in great shape. But people that have been fortunate enough to see this, I'm sure will treasure that memory forever.
Well, I know in your book you have a photo of Mike Rumsey, who will be on our show eventually, showing somebody, I think, one of the drawers in that room. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. That's Christopher Russell. Christopher Russell is Sir Arthur's youngest son, and he's been enormously helpful to me during the project. We managed to arrange for him to have a visit. So that was a great day.
I'm quickly flipping through the book, hoping I just chance on that photograph so I can share it, but I'm not finding it. It's such a thick book. It's wonderful. All right, sorry.
Well, I can turn it up.
So I love this part of the show. Roy and I talked about this when we were doing our pre-interview meeting, and I had so many questions about how you go about creating a book like this. So Roy has put together a bunch of slides, and he's going to give some advice and talk a little bit about his methodology. This isn't the only way to make a book, but this is the way that Roy has done it. So Roy, you've done 3 fabulous books, and you've got a lot of great information to share. So anyone out there who's interested or thinking about publishing their own book, this is Mineral Book Publishing 101. It's really a master class. So Roy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. I think from my point of view, if just one person in the audience decided to go away and write a book, I think that would be a real result for this evening. But you have to start somewhere. And the first thing is really to start gathering information. It may be something that you've already done over a period of time, simply by dint of visiting somewhere or living somewhere. But you also need to define the scope, because if you don't have boundaries, you won't actually know when you've completed the task. And it's pretty important to have some sort of project plan. It's often the case that people start things and they just wither on the vine because there's no real structure to it. And in my case, it was really important to start with, so identify target collections, museums, institutions, maybe people with private collections that would be worth visiting. Then you had to go about visiting the places, getting permission to take photographs, maybe go back to check things. And in parallel with that, certainly for the Cairngorms, there would be field work, library research, going into archives, and contact development, because inevitably when you start digging into something, people say, oh, you should go and talk to Fred, or you should go and see Steve. And then that's another line of inquiry. And the little screenshot on the right there, you can see that at this point, I had 50 gigabytes of data. So that's data, images, and so on, 9,000 files in 340 folders. So that was the sort of size of my data bank. And just for amusement, I worked that out at about 37,000 floppy disks, because it's not that long ago. I don't actually know what 37,000 floppy disks would look like. It's probably.
Yeah, but Roy, were those 3.5-inch disks or 5.25-inch disks?
Yeah, 3.5. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so let's go on to the next one. There are some other things that are really important to think about. The first one is that we're so lucky now with digital photography. You can use digital photography like a notebook. It's much quicker to photograph something than it is to transcribe it. Also worth knowing that university libraries will often permit limited public access if you're doing a serious project. And of course, most people now will realize that the online resources are just amazing, and much of it is free. And when you get down to the detail of actually going and visiting people, seeing museum curators or landowners, in the main, they're both interested and helpful. You get the odd person that isn't, but all of this stuff needs to be gathered and put together in some sort of structured manner. And one of the other things that I learned very early on is make sure you take all of the interesting snippets. It may not mean anything, just a name on a piece of paper, but later on you may find out who that person was, and that may lead you onto another line of inquiry. So gradually we would start to build up a manuscript. And if we go to the next slide, it'll be too small for people to read, but you'll just get some sense that you're typing this document. I just use Word. And you know that there's something you perhaps need a photograph of, or there's a reference that you're aware that exists, but you haven't got or can't find. And so the color coding just meant different things to me at various stages in the project. But gradually you start to pile up, tens of pages, hundreds of pages, thousands of words. And in parallel with that, it's really important to maintain your bibliography. So the next slide shows the structure of the references section.
Now, Roy, before we jump to the next slide, I want to mention a point here. There are a lot of software packages on the market that will help you write a screenplay, help you organize, write a book. Scrivener is a very, very popular and powerful tool here in the U.S. I don't know if people in the U.K. use it as well, but I think it's notable to mention that you are using basically Word. So while these tools may be helpful and effective to a lot of people, they're not necessary. And so some of these software tools, they cost a few $100s. Some of them are subscription based, but practically everybody has Word or Pages or some kind of word processing software. And if that's all you have, there's nothing wrong with that, because that's what Roy's been using.
The simpler the better, as far as I'm concerned.
It's the effect, whatever tool works, basically. And here you are taking a very common tool and using color coding and making it happen. And here's your bibliography reference page.
So this was just compiled in parallel. So anytime I quoted something, I put the source in the bibliography, because it's really annoying later if you can't remember where you found a snippet of information or a fact.
Certainly.
So the next thing that people need to think about is you do need to have permission to do some of this. And the next slide just says something briefly about copyright and reproduction fees. If someone else has published it, then there will possibly be a copyright. You could fall foul of that. You do need to get permission if you want to republish things. And generally, if you want images of paintings or portraits and that sort of thing, most galleries and museums will want you to pay some sort of fee. It's usually manageable, but they do tend to mount up. And more difficult are diagrams and drawings, because then you're going to have to go to an individual artist or practitioner, and that may cost you a couple of $100. But those are all things to be thinking about as you work on through.
And I want to add a comment on this, Roy. Because there are so many things that are available online, photographs that people can view online, just because they are there doesn't mean that you have the right to use them. Someone like Jeff Scoville is someone who has thousands, tens of thousands of photographs out there. And even to this day, if I need a photograph and I want to use one of Scoville's photographs, I always ask their permission also. And Jeff is so good with this. As long as he gets photo credit, he's pretty good with letting you use the photographs. And so it's not a cost issue. It's really a respect issue. And so he's put a lot of time and effort in making the photographs. He deserves the recognition and the respect of that, as anybody does if you're reproducing their work. So I love that you made it a point to talk about this issue, because that's a very important thing.
Yeah. So the next one is perhaps turning things on its head. You start off wondering, have I got enough information to do the job? And this was just the word count for the Cairngorms book as it progressed. And suddenly you get to, wow, 100,000 words. How many pages will that be? And you quickly do a calculation and you think, whoa, stop. So you do have to think about that. And certainly on the two bigger books, I had very much a page count plan in mind from a very early stage, because there's no point in generating stuff you can't use.
Now, that page count, was that based on experience, or What?
Yeah, well, I made a plan. I didn't want the thing to be more than about 2 kilos in weight because of postage. In the end, both of them exceeded 2 kilos, but there's another factor. You can't optimize everything.
Sure. Yeah.
So if we skip to the next one, we're going to just say a little bit about typesetting and layout. If you've never played this game, it's probably fairly opaque. But when you look at a book, and if you've played with a word processor, it's fairly easy to slide things in and move things around. Once you've laid out a typeset page, it's a lot more difficult. And so, I mean, this is nothing like as bad as when it was hot metal type, which is what the picture is. But it is more like building a wall than typing a document, because once you've laid out chapters 1, 2, and 3, going back and putting another picture or page in is a lot of pain. So paying attention and planning is really key. So I thought we might briefly just take a look at the process of the collections research. So the next picture is a series of thumbnail shots, and this is how I went about data capture. These are specimens in the Natural History Museum, and I simply measured. You'll see there's a scale bar at the top in some of them. So I took a photo with the scale bar. I photographed the label, both sides if there was something on the back, the specimen from each side. And this then built up to be a visual database. And then from that, you could then down select which particular specimens might make the final cut as proper images. So if we go to the next one.
Well, let me just make a comment on this, if I may, Roy. I truly appreciate your thoroughness here in not only photographing the specimen, but the scale, and also both sides of the labels. And as you have in the third row there are 2 labels, and you got both sides of those labels, rather than jotting down what you feel are at the time the important bits of information on the label. You actually photograph the label. Going back to your earlier comment, you don't know what bit is going to be important until you're much further down the line. And this is an incredibly methodical and really well done process that you have here. Yeah. Really respect that.
It's pretty robust. It works well.
Yeah. And the digital photography, going back again to a point that you made earlier, that digital photography makes this possible. If we were back in the days of shooting chromes or slides, you wouldn't dare do anything like this.
No, it's a real game changer. Yeah. And the other thing, of course, you can send it anywhere in the world instantly.
Indeed.
If you can't read something, pop it on the internet. Someone will say, "Oh, I think it's this," or whatever. So, yeah.
And, kind of going on the tech side for a second, you can take these things, and if you have like a Dropbox account, you can upload them all to Dropbox, and then you have access to them wherever you are, whether or not even if you have your own computer. So the digital has changed everything.
Just amazing. Yeah. So the next one shows an example. So here we have a specimen, which is a topaz crystal. It's actually featured in Sowerby's British Mineralogy. And the transcript is of the label in the museum catalogue, and my transcript at the bottom there, which actually made the text. And the next one is another similar one, just to illustrate that if you have this information, then subsequently you can engineer the text, because you have all the information, who it's from, what its registration number was, what its dimensions are. I weighed all the gemstone type specimens. And so if you want to include it, you've then got all the information. And in the case of things that were going to be figured, I then made a subsequent trip and took what you might call a proper photograph, like this one. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I thought would be just interesting to touch on is that along the way, and if we go to the next slide, you can get all sorts of sub-projects springing up. And you do have to be careful about these, because they can become all-consuming and very interesting. But this was a collection that I discovered in the literature. We're talking about being in a book 100 years or so old. I went in search to see whether anything survived, and to my surprise, I was told, yes, it did. So I said, could I come and see it? And this is a picture of the Farquharson of Invercold collection in the attic of Braemar Castle. And that was the state it was when I found it. And if we go to the next one, you'll see that they also have one of the very large surviving Cairngorm crystals. This weighs about 50 pounds.
Wow.
And this was carried back by a lady shepherdess from the top of the Cairngorms. So she must have been a stout lass.
Indeed.
So
I love it.
having found this collection, I thought it would be great to actually curate it. So I offered to the estate and said, look, I will come up. I'll bring my trusted assistants in the shape of my wife. We will bring everything we need to do the job. They very kindly put us up in a cottage on the estate for a week, and we photographed and documented it. And they now have something that they're proud of. And the next slide shows us setting up a display cabinet. It was actually -degrees, sub-zero conditions in the castle. We were doing this in February, which is why I'm wearing a woolly hat. They provided the case. They paid to have some graphics done. And the next picture shows the final installation. And, surprisingly, I would say that is still the best exhibit in the UK of the minerals of the Cairngorms. And it's a private venture done by an amateur, supported by the local community. And it's something that they're very proud to have. So
and that was just all a side project that came out of working on a book.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one touches on perhaps the next logical thing in the process is once you've produced it, you need to get it out there. So you need to get copies to people who will read it and comment on it. So the classical book review, maybe get mentions on websites or whatever. So that's pretty much the life cycle of the story. And I thought we might now just look briefly in a little detail at the other two books. So the first one, the next slide, is a map of the Midlands. And so this is just the middle of the UK. The heavy black line defines the edge of the study area, and I live more or less at the centre of that. And I just thought I'd pick out a couple of examples. The next one is me actually on field work, going down a shaft at Beige Mine, which is a very famous locality. It's the type locality for phosgenite and malachite. And the next shot shows you the shaft. It's about 300 feet deep. Wow. And the next shot shows you a specimen of phosgenite from that mine. And this links back to Dick Barstow, who we talked about earlier. And this is one of his personal collection specimens, which was subsequently sold by Lindsay Greenbank to Derby Museum, where it now resides. And it came from the Burncoose Assay Office collection, which was part of the famous Williams mining family in Cornwall. And the next one, I thought we might have some decorative stone. This is Derbyshire Blue John. This was an amazing sale, which very conveniently happened in Birmingham, just 20 miles from where I live, right in the middle of me producing the book. And so I was able to go and sit in the auction room and watch all this stuff sold. And this is a banded variety of fluorite that occurs in Derbyshire at Castleton. So that was a really nice happenstance as well. So the next couple, if we go to the next one, we're skipping on now to Russell. I just wanted to give people some sense of how I went about the Russell project. So again, you've seen the Russell room and the cabinets, exactly the same process. So for each specimen, I examined it. I took a digital photo of the specimen, its labels, any accompanying documentation. And in the next slide, the other half of the story was a wonderful collection of paperwork, which was salvaged from Swallowfield by Bob Symes and John Fuller, who were the two young men sent to retrieve the collection. And they basically gathered all the material that was lying around in Sir Arthur's mineral room and brought it to the museum. And this includes things like laundry bills, bank letters, stockbrokers' letters, mineralogical correspondence, all sorts of things. And so that was really a treasure trove for me. And I was able to digitize all of that. And that was very fortunate because I did that before COVID hit. And I was able to work right through the pandemic as if I'd been able to go to the reading room in the British Museum.
Brilliant.
Now, the other vital ingredient of any mineral book, I guess, is photos. And so the next couple of slides just illustrate how I went about doing this. And if anyone's seen Jeff Scoville in action, this is a slightly budget version of the Scoville setup. It's a sheet of glass. It has reflectors. And really the key here is you want to be in control of the light. And so I use electronic flash through a diffuser. The camera is obviously at right angles to the bench there. And you can use different colored backgrounds. You can have it on black. You can fade it out to gray. And this is totally portable. And I carry everything around in a great big suitcase on wheels. And I can be up and running in about 20 minutes anywhere that was prepared to have me. And so for the book, I took thousands of photos and culled that down to 450 final specimen images from about 6,000 images taken. And that is really a major amount of work. And the next slide shows just...
No, Roy, I want to make one comment about this. You had mentioned earlier that the tins that are holding up the glass there are actually tins of corned beef hash. And so in the event that you got hungry in the middle of the shoot, you didn't have to go out. You could just open one of the tins and eat it there.
Yeah.
Am I remembering that conversation correctly?
You are quite correct. And I'll also add that I think Alan Hart's on the call. I remember Alan walking past one day disdainfully and saying, "Ha, baked bean tin photography." But it's whatever works. So you don't need to spend thousands on special setup. You do need a decent camera with a macro lens and a flash gun, but the rest of it is basically stuff I had lying around.
I love photographs like this because it's so much the image of the sausage factory at work. I mean, like you can see what's on camera right now in terms of the new studio setup that I have. But if you could see what I could see, I think you'd all laugh. And Roy, you saw earlier when I switched cameras what it really looks like here, and we all had a good laugh at that.
So this is just one example. So this was a specimen of what's known as a capped quartz. And these form because of a discontinuity in the growth of the crystal and deposition of a very thin clay layer. And so the cap will quite easily detach. And I wanted to show this thing as if someone was docking their cap. And so I built this little jig. And if you flip to the next one, you can see what the finished result looks like. And so that is a real specimen photo. It's not been photoshopped into position. It was actually photographed like that. So you can have a bit of fun doing these sorts of things. So to round off, I thought we'll have a look at some of Sir Arthur's wonderful specimens. And if we could take the next one, Brian. This is a beautiful calcite crystal from Stank Mine in West Cumberland, was Lancashire at the time. And I put this one in because this belonged to Sir Arthur's mother. She had her own mineral collection, and she gave it to him when he was quite a young lad. And this is one of the remaining traceable specimens. And this came from John Graves, who was a famous West Cumberland dealer. The next one is from one of the sort of old collections, a well-known collector, Isaac Walker. He was a London brewer. And his specimens were almost without exception superb. He bought many of them at Henry Hoyland's sales in London. And when I was looking through the drawers to try and select candidate images for photography, I was surprised how often the one that I would select would be an Isaac Walker collection specimen. So this is a magnificent chalcocite from Cook's Kitchen Mine in Cornwall. The next one is from another old collection. This is John Ruskin. He was a famous art critic, writer, a sort of philanthropist, very keen on educating the working man. And his family home at Brantwood in Cumberland now is a significant tourist attraction. And they have recently repatriated some of his mineral collection, and they've got a very nice gallery there. And there's a picture of that actually in the book. But this is a beautiful thing with the sort of overgrowth of the iron on the quartz and the ice cube of blue fluorite. The next one, I think people will recognize this. This is a horsetooth siderite from Will Maudlin. People will perhaps be familiar with the very large specimen in the BM, which belonged to John Lavin of Penzance. This will have come from the same cavity, and these are much sought after by British collectors, but they're rather expensive items to acquire. Next, we'll go to a rather beautiful cuprite. This is from the Williams family collection. This is in superb condition. Obviously, cuprite can tend to darken with time, but this is very much still very, very dark red. And this came from the famous Cornish dealer, Richard Talling, and from them to the Williams collection, and then the Williams collection through to Arthur. The next one is another old specimen. This is from the Stackhouse Pendarvis collection. So this is John Stackhouse and Edward William Wynne Pendarvis. Again, major West Country collectors. And this is a livenite, copper arsenate. And it's just a beautiful thing. And it's very tempting to think that would be nice to stroke. But of course, that's not what you want to do to mineral specimens. You damage all the terminations. But from the very famous Will Gordon mine in Cornwall. Moving further north, we've got a rather nice interpenetrant fluorite specimen. This is from the famous Boltzburn mine. The original collection from which this came is not clear. It does have an old label, but we don't know exactly which collection. But I chose this photo because you can see all the steps of the sort of vicinal faces on the, I don't know if you can point with your mouse, Brian, but you can see on that left-hand bright face, there are 100 steps if you go from the apex to the edge of the crystal. And this is not untypical of Northern England specimens. The next one's also a fluorite, and this is perhaps one of the things that people view as something they covet. These apple green fluorites came from St. Peter's mine, and Arthur managed to get into a pocket of this at the end of the workings, and he more or less hoovered it up. And there's a near complete drawer of wonderful specimens of these in the Russell collection. And a group of collectors subsequently, maybe 20 years ago, did get access and permission to go down the mine. They did find some yellow fluorite and siderite, but nothing in this sort of hue. So they're really quite unique. The next one will take us to Devon and to a very famous locality, the Virtuous Lady Mine. And we've got a pop-up about speedy fires. I'm going to go away. So Virtuous Lady Mine is famous for quartz and siderite. And this is a box. These are now reckoned to be epimorphs after fluorite. And then commonly the hollowed out core has later crystallizations of maybe chalcopyrite, quartz, siderite in. And there's a very large one on display in the Natural History Museum in the vault, but that's not actually part of the Russell collection. But Sir Arthur purchased the collection of Edmund Pierce, who was a surgeon of Tavistock. There are several hundred specimens, and he really cornered the market in Virtuous Lady. And as a result of that, he produced a superb topographical paper in the Mineralogical magazine. The next one dips into one that got away. Robert Ferguson of Raith was a famous politician and landowner up in Scotland. And he had a magnificent mineral collection. And Russell tried for a period of more than 25 years to acquire this from his descendants unsuccessfully. But in 1932, he had visited Raith House and met with the then Viscount Novar, who had very kindly given him some specimens. And I suspect that Viscount Novar must have felt he was dealing with a gentleman and may have said to Arthur, well, choose a few if you would like. And Russell chose extremely well. He had several figured specimens from British Mineralogy. This is a fantastic lamicite. And I can only think that if you delved with a microprobe into the back of those shadowy cavities, you might find some very interesting specimens, maybe Scotlandite, Mathedalite, maybe new minerals, who knows. The next one takes us back to Cumbria. I've got three more from Cumbria. This is a beautiful West Cumbrian hematite-stained calcite from Windscales mine, actually collected by Arthur himself in 1930. The next one is a quite exquisite pale blue barite. This comes from the J.J. Cousins, John James Cousins collection. He was actually a vicar, And he bought many specimens from John Graves, and his collection was subsequently acquired by a chap called Charles Trelease in Bristol. And this is one of the specimens that was then later acquired by Russell. And the next one takes us to the yellow end of the spectrum. I just love this specimen. So we have barite on dolomite, probably from Mowbray or Parkside Mine. Again, the details been lost, but a wonderful example of the type. Now, I thought I couldn't pass up on a lirocconite. So here's a lirocconite for those that like blue things. This has a very good pedigree, comes from the Richard Davey collection of Bochum House. His collection passed to a guy called James Wickett. Some of his specimens are in the Royal Cornwall Museum, and then later to Edward Wilton Newton, and it was purchased for 30 shillings by Russell. So that was a good buy at the time. And our last mineral photo, I think, is the next one. A beautiful blue fluorite and quartz from Will Gorland from the George Croker Fox collection. And there were 3 Fox family collections which Arthur set his heart on acquiring, and he did ultimately succeed in getting all of them. And this comes from the George Croker Fox collection. So to round things off, Brian, I thought if we could look at the next one, this is what happens when you get close to the end of the road. So you've typed the thing, you've given it to the typesetter, you've laid it all out, you've placed a purchase order with the printer, and then you have to wait. And I was very interested in Gloria Stabler's episode I think it was probably last year, when she was talking about the processes and the care that they go to with colour reproduction.
Right.
And the problem with minerals is you guys will all know if the linerite is not the right blue and the malachite is not the right green. And you can do as many proofs as you want, but the proof process is different to the printing process. It's on different paper using different inks. And so it's only when these things arrive, which are the folded cut sheets, that you know it's going to be okay. And if we skip to the next one, I've laid some of these out flat. And so at this point, you can start to relax, and you then start thinking about, okay, so in 4 weeks' time, we should go to the next one, you're going to get some pallets arriving. In the case of the 2 big books, it was 4 pallets each. Wow. They weigh about a ton. And this time I've learnt the lesson. You don't have them delivered to your home address. You go and rent a locked-up store, and you get them offloaded with the forklift truck. And that's what I've done now.
Terrific.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So
Roy,
yeah.
Thank you so much. Typically by now we would launch the poll, or we will have launched the poll. Okay, Roy, I'm going to ask you not to look at that. Go ahead and close the window. Yeah. We're going to give the viewers a chance to respond to the poll.
I'm sorry, Brian. I was so into the talk. I completely forgot about the pool. My apologies. I really enjoyed the talk.
I was sending her messages, and I'm like, oh my God, Raquel must be drinking or whatever.
No, I was just really focused on the talk, so I didn't look at my phone. Apologies. But people have.
It was absolutely a fantastic talk. I mean, this is, the latest book is a great book, and I have found the image of Mike Rumsey right there.
Yeah.
And we saw the layout of that you shared with us here, and you can see how photographically rich the book is just in these 6 pages as a sample. And I have to say that throughout the book, it is every bit as rich, and it really is so much fun to go through this book. So I think Ann Fraser commented on the chat that don't wait, buy it now, get it before Tucson. So Roy, following up on Ann's comment, where can people purchase this book if they don't want to wait till Tucson?
Well, if they're in the States, Gloria Stabler has some stock. I don't know how many she's got left. If they're in France, Louis-Dominique Bayle of La Reine Minerale has some. And the simplest method otherwise is my website, britishmineralogy.com, and you can just pay with PayPal.
Terrific. And what is the shipping cost? I know you sent me this copy from your home to me here in Honolulu.
Yeah, it's £35.
So what was the cost of that?
It's
I'm sorry?
£35 on top of the
£35.
Yeah.
Okay. And that took, if I remember correctly, that took about a week and a half, 2 weeks to get to me.
Yeah, I always use a tracked delivery service. So, yeah.
Yeah. Terrific. Okay. Then, Roy, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go into the quick fire 5 questions. And you know how this works. I have 5 questions. Each question has 2 answers. All of your answers are correct. We're going to see how well the audience guessed what you're going to answer correctly here. Okay? And so these are just initial reactions. If you don't resonate with either of the answer, just make one up, okay? And anyone who gets them all wrong has to buy you a drink in Tucson.
Yeah. I'll be there for a week. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Question number 1. Jason Bourne or James Bond?
James Bond.
James Bond. Didn't even have to think about that one. Question 2. Highland Scotch or IPA?
Highland Scotch.
Highland Scotch. Good answer. Question 3. This is a tough one. I think this is probably the toughest one. Pasty or pizza?
Pasty, probably. Yeah.
Good answer. Good answer. Question 4. Cabin in the mountains or cottage by the sea?
Cabin in the mountains, no question.
No question about that. And final question. Fluorite or Lorocanite?
Oh, that is hard, isn't it?
Ah.
All right, I think probably. Yeah.
Fluorite. Wow. Okay. Raquel, let's see how our readers did. Question number 1, Jason Bourne or James Bond? Without hesitation, Roy came up with James Bond. What did our readers say, or our viewers say?
Same like the audience, agree with him.
100%. Fantastic. Question number 2, Highland Scotch or IPA? Roy went with the Scotch. What did our viewers say?
Same like our readers.
Ooh, I think these questions are getting too easy. Question number 3, pasty or pizza? Roy, of course, went with pasty.
84% pasty.
Oh. Question 4, cabin in the mountains, cottage at the sea. Roy chose the cabin in the mountains.
I think by the pictures, it was also clear where Roy used to hang out. So cabin in the mountains.
Yeah, I didn't see much beach action going on there. Yeah. And the final question, this was a tough one even for Roy. Fluorite or Lorocanite? What did our viewers say?
And this is also was the only one that the audience got wrong because they went with Lorocanite.
I would have gone with Lorocanite as well. Well, there you go. Okay, so any of them, this is just honor system. Any of you out there, if you got all of them wrong, I think you actually owe Roy a lunch at the Tucson Fine Mineral Gallery. All right, Roy, this is the segment of the show where we're going to go into the Q&A section. That these are questions that people have written in based on what they've been seeing over the last hour. So Raquel's going to answer or ask some of these questions to you, and these are things that our viewers would like to know.
Yes, great. So I'm going to start with one by anonymous attendee. He said, in the age of so much publishing going to the web, how do you think about publishing have changed? And also the second question is for those of us who hope to publish in print or to the web, what advice can you give us?
Okay, well, I think most people still prefer paper. I mean, Brian shows you when you pick up a quality book, I think it has something about it, not least the smell of the ink. I mean, if it's a new book, you open it and it's like getting a new car. So I think there'll always be a place for books. Publishing things on the web, I guess, is inherently much more easy to do. Once you finish playing with it in the computer, you just upload it to wherever you're going to store it. But I don't think it has the same sort of durability, really, as a book, personally. Yeah.
So one single advice for someone that is going to try to publish in one way or another, what would be your number one tip or crucial advice?
I think, well, the first thing is you've really got to want to do it. It's no good just thinking, well, I'm going to have a go. And is you really going to commit some time to it? You're talking, for something like these, you're talking about thousands of hours of effort, but it's hugely entertaining. If you enjoy what you're doing, it's much better than reading a book. Actually doing the research is much more fun. Yeah. So be committed, I think, is probably the main thing. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question. Do you get permissions for the institution and the photographer?
Yeah, well, all the photography was done by me, so that wasn't a problem. You just need to get permission to do the photography and then to reproduce them. In the case of the Natural History Museum, they were wonderful to work with because they were allowing me to do that under a Creative Commons license. So, and that means that I can use the images for any purpose and they can use the images for any purpose. So that's fine. Many institutions insist on owning the copyright, even if you take the picture, and that is a bit of a nuisance because it means every time you want to use the image, you have to get permission. Yeah.
I actually can comment on that. We request just to be acknowledged, and they're asking for permission is just a way for us to keep it in our records, which says how much that image or that specimen is being used. So we can also, when we are going to write grants or something, it's a good resource for us to say, look, that specimen has been requested to photograph 10,000 times. And so I don't think the public should see requesting permissions as an issue. It's more of a way of acknowledging the work that we do. So it also helps the museum to get those requests. From an institution point of view.
Yeah. It's very difficult for museums and galleries at the moment because funding is so difficult. I mean, certainly in the UK, we're in terrible trouble. And therefore, charging people for information or for images is a very tempting opportunity. However, in my view, it's counterproductive because really you're advertising the information or the collection that the institution has free of charge. But it is a problem.
Yeah. We don't charge, just to say. We charge only when the image is like the Golden Horn, for example, is going to go on the book cover of a book. Then probably we charge $35. So something minimal, but it helps us the amount of hours it goes in to get something. So I guess from museum's perspective, it's not to earn money, is to try to be a little bit more sustainable, because taking the specimens out, collecting all that, it takes some time. Like I'm sure Mike spent thousands of hours with you also working on that. So to justify that, getting some funding always help. But okay, thanks. And then we have another more personal questions. He is the anonymous attendee. What was Roy's money earning profession while conducting these mineral field trips? I think it's more wondering, how do you sustain yourself when you're your own publisher?
No, I worked in manufacturing industry in a whole range of different industries over 40 years. So this was what kept me sane, really, rather than worrying about production deadlines and operational problems. So operations management basically in manufacturing.
Okay.
So you had a real job during all of this.
Yeah. Well, the last two. No, I've been retired. The two big books were done since I retired. Yeah.
Okay. I have another question. What's your next project? And Andy, by the way, he loved the Russell one.
Yeah. Well, there probably will be another one, but I'd like someone else to publish it. I think the publishing and distribution, moving these things around is starting to become, it's getting quite hard work. And 5 years on from now, I'm going to be 5 years older. So, I'm happy to do the research and the writing, but I'd probably like to get someone else to publish it. We'll see. I don't have a definite plan. Yeah.
Very good.
But I do have some ISBN numbers left. So, yeah.
I'm sure.
So, Roy, let me ask you this: for your next project, would it have to be a UK-based site, or are you open to worldwide?
Well, my interest is really British minerals. I only collect British minerals. You have only got so much space. So, yeah. I mean, there are plenty of other candidates. Scotland would be another. There's plenty of interesting historical sites in Scotland. Lead Hills, Winelock Head, for example. And also some of the other collectors. So, yeah, I'm considering some options at the moment. Yeah.
Terrific.
Roy, one more question. While you were doing all these book projects, your collecting passion, did he move into a second place? So you still kept collecting?
No, I'm still collecting. Yeah. I mean, like many countries, I think the UK, it's getting harder. It's getting harder to get permission to go into working quarries. But the Russell Society, for example, is very fortunate in having good relationships. Landowners are getting more hesitant about letting people onto their localities or underground. But yeah, we're still fairly active field collecting. Yeah.
Very good. Hopefully the Russell Society start getting the attraction of younger collectors.
Well, we hope. I don't think we have any teenagers anymore. A few in their 20s, but yeah.
Yeah.
But as Brian has mentioned previously, the Young Mineral Collectors Association in the States is obviously doing well, and let's hope that continues. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very active.
Yeah.
Well, these are all the questions from our side, Brian.
Terrific. Raquel, thank you so much. And Roy, thank you for coming on the show. It was absolutely a fantastic presentation. Lots of great comments in the chat field. That's going to be the end of our show, but in parting, I'm going to leave you all with this one last view of Roy in the Pahoehoe lava flow over on the Big Island of Hawaii. Roy, when was this taken? I've got the year cut off on my version.
November 2013.
2013. Yeah. So it was not that long ago. Cheers. I wish I had known and we could have gotten together, but that's going to... Yeah, next time.
See you in Tucson for sure. Yeah.
Cheers, absolutely. So that's going to be it for this show. Mahalo for all of you tuning in. Tune in next month. Next month, we're actually going to have the show on the second Wednesday of the month because the first Wednesday of the month, a bunch of us are traveling. So we will see you the second Wednesday of September. Be good, keep collecting, and have a great month. We'll see you later.